We are living through one of the most extraordinary moments in history. On a technological level, the disruption that we're seeing right now with AI is probably more disruptive or will be more disruptive than even electricity was, because it's touching something which is much more fundamental. It's touching intelligence. And of course, on an individual level, we've been all seeing it, using it, having fun with it. The memes, the social media, it's everywhere. It's everything that we're doing on a personal level. But now on an enterprise level, it's also starting to really pick up velocity, and we're starting to talk about true AI transformation on an enterprise level. So what are we facing? Well, we're facing a general use of this technology. AI is going to be everywhere for us, both on our personal lives and in our work lives. And knowing that, we have to also accept one thing, that there is a cost to this intelligence. Okay. And this cost of intelligence isn't a small cost, it's actually a very fundamental cost. Let me give you some numbers. Okay. If data centers were a country, they would be the fifth largest energy consumer in the world today, sitting somewhere between Japan and Russia. And by 2030, the consensus projection is that it's going to double. So imagine the use of energy. Now, most energy is actually today used in the is consumed in the training of AI models, and the water impact is staggering. So the water used by artificial intelligence is expected to equal the needs of 1.3 billion people by 2030. Okay, this isn't a crisis. This isn't something that we're making up. These are actual numbers, and they're numbers that we cannot ignore, especially when we're talking about a technology which is going to be used in our everyday lives, in our everyday work. So the question becomes, for business leaders, and for the panel today, is not whether AI has an environmental cost. It does. The question is, how do we harness the extraordinary power of AI while also building transparency, governance, that we need in order for the innovation to be managed and the cost to remain manageable? How do we do this responsibly? And that's what this panel is here to actually explore. So please welcome me in joining them. I'm going to ask you all to introduce each other. So I'm going to begin with Carolin.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, for hosting the session today and for inviting me to be part of this panel. My name is Carolin Rubner, and I work for Siemens. I've been there for quite some time. I've worked out of the US in various locations and also in Germany. I'm part of a central research division, so it's foundational technologies, research and pre-development. And we always have been looking at software, the software development lifecycle, and how we can have that at industrial grade. And one of the qualities that we need to guarantee that our products have is also sustainability. And since AI is also a very important topic for us, I'm very interested in this discussion today. Thank you.
Super. And Pascal, please.
So hello everyone, I'm Pascal Joly. So as you can guess from my accent, I'm originally from France, but I spent quite a bit of my life in California, where I now live. And I launched my consulting company about 3.5 years ago to focus on education around responsible IT, as well as very quickly I built a course about sustainable AI. So that was about 3 years ago. And I've been really looking into all the issues around measurements and impact and how you can mitigate these impacts through both my educational services as well as advisory services that I provide to large tech companies who are all asking the same questions.
Okay, and Anurag, please.
Hi, hello everybody. Lovely to be here, and thank you so much for having this panel discussion. I am pretty sure I'm going to gain more from it than contribute in it. I basically, in my role, I am responsible for bringing AI to our customers in all its different forms and fashion. And I must confess, I mean, all the things that I do sustainability is not the topic that is usually on my mind when we are doing this, which is going to be an important learning, but at the same time, I think as citizens of this, of this planet, I think we all are super aware of the cost of some of these things and the planetary life that at some level we are all responsible for. So clearly, I try and share how we think about it, but broadly, I'm a AI person. I've spent most of my life just working on these topics. But very happy to be here and talking to you all.
Super. Okay, and I'll introduce myself. I'm Peter Hammer. I'm from the Nagarro marketing team, and I'll never miss an occasion when I moderate to say that today and for today only, I can be MC Hammer. For those old enough to know, it's an opportunity to transform, and we're going to begin with an overarching theme because AI promises a smarter future. That's really what it's all about, right? It's about bringing us a new form of intelligence. But today, can we really call ourselves smart? Are we really being smart with this resource-intensive AI transformation that we're currently pushing? Does anybody want to take a first stab at it? Maybe Pascal.
All right. So yeah, this is maybe almost a loaded question, but I think everybody would like to say that they are. And on the other hand, there is this race to be the first one and make sure that we don't miss the train. That nobody quite understand exactly at this point, why we're racing or why we're racing so fast and towards what goal. And so I think there is, this dichotomy of, on one hand, sort of embracing innovation, the only innovation that AI can bring, and on the other hand, trying to keep up with it, right? And being smart about it is being, thinking, longer term, not very short term. And there's this dichotomy and tension right now about the ability to do that.
Absolutely. That's one that I'm going to touch up on later in the discussion, but I absolutely agree. Nobody wants to admit today that they're not using AI. Please, Carolin.
Yeah, so for us, innovation has always been really a driver, and AI is really at the center right now at everything that we're doing. We're putting a big focus on this because you said, just like electricity, I think it's just going to totally change how we work and how our products are. And I think in order to be smart about AI, we need to look at all the costs of AI. So today, maybe we see money because we pay for it, but energy, water, carbon, hardware are also additional costs that we maybe are not as transparent for everybody that's using AI right now.
Absolutely. And Anurag, while it's not sustainable focused, we've also that MIT report that came out to show that very few companies were seeing any return on investment. So even on a business level, today, how we're advancing with AI or the AI transformation, are we being smart, even beyond sustainability?
Clearly not, and I'd agree with the panel that it is, we are definitely not acting smartly. And I think the state of affairs right now is more driven by a rush to not get left behind, as as a tendency that's playing out. So it's more the fear of not investing in a topic like this and the consequence of what that might lead into the future, right? So this is definitely as a trait, not a smart trait, but then I think at the same time, this is one of those times when we need examples of individuals, organizations, research people to sort of like bring the sense of how could organizations really abandon this fear of getting left out, right? Like what could they do, right? So this is not very obviously clear. It seems like we haven't really explored that, acknowledged that fear, and tried to address it very directly either. We are expecting rational behavior from a lot of parties in this case, lots of nations, lots of companies, but we as people, as organizations, as countries have not been rational in the past. So my thinking is that on the one hand, clearly this is not smart, but at the same time, I think we are being very presumptuous about being smart from day one while not working towards really figuring out how does one really allay that fear. So that's how I would respond to that. But to your other point about ROI and all of that, I think that is all postponed to a future right now. I think the whole thing is don't get left behind because otherwise the gap will be too much and there would be no ROI to really build on.
Does anybody want to react to that? Because it brings up something fundamental, which, Anurag, are you suggesting that there's a lack of governance in general?
I mean, see, policy is always it follows innovation. I don't think policy precedes innovation, and if it will be, then we would be living in a very different world, in my opinion. But the journey from innovation to policy need not be very long, and it need not be like after we have made some dramatic mistakes, and it's too hard to reverse that. Like it shouldn't be that wrong. Like so I would say, well, it definitely requires policy. It definitely requires a bunch of people to come together, a bunch of companies, countries to come together and talk about it. And in this world, talking seems to be the most difficult thing that people can do sensibly across the table, right? So yeah, I mean, I say that is the challenge broadly.
For me, also a big portion of the challenge is transparency. It feels like you have access, you can use a lot of AI, learn a little bit, and it's almost not fair to kind of ask people to use it responsibly without them having any direct feedback. It's almost like we're all going to the gas station and no gas station shows the counter, like how much things cost. And I mean, you know that they're all different, right? We have smaller, medium, large models. Everything is different, but you don't really see that. So I think transparency is, for me, is a really big topic.
Pascal, have you been able to look into the issue of transparency with your clients, and has that come up?
Yeah, very much so. So this is something that has been deeply into my radar for quite some time now. And actually, I just came back from the Trellis conference, which was this week, the Trellis Impact Conference, which is a climate conference was in San Francisco. And we had a chance to have, through workshops, really deep discussion about this topic and how we should be more collaborative. And for the first time, I saw at the table not just the big tech companies and the consumer of those models, but also the Anthropic and OpenAI people who are starting to get into those issues of sustainability, and they're just getting hired essentially. And I think it's important to have everyone represented for those discussions, and also trying to collaborate effectively to move towards a standard, even though we know that things are moving very fast. And standard, as Anurag mentioned, tend to follow and be much slower. But I think there's a consensus right now in the industry that we need to also have something that's good enough, essentially, in terms of providing the methodology and information to everyone.
Which is a perfect segue, Pascal, to our second theme, which is making the invisible visible. Okay, because it took a long time for us to reach standards in sustainability, to which companies were going to be measured and to which we had to abide. I don't think we can afford to have the same length of time happen for AI. So today, before we can reduce the resource footprint of AI, we first need to kind of understand what the footprint is and where should companies measure it first. What are the metrics, the KPIs? What should they be looking at? Is that something that's being discussed at the moment? And today, if business leaders are watching us, what should they be focused on?
Yeah, so from my perspective, also, I've been trying to build some tools like a browser extension and sort of a navigator of models to help people figure out the most efficient model. And I think there are things that you can do with even with the limited information that we have today to enable companies to make the right action and influence the behavior when exposed to those technologies.
Yeah, I was just looking if I can post something in the chat, but I think the chat is disabled. So at the Green Software Foundation, there's the software carbon intensity specification, and now there's also a software carbon intensity specification for AI. So I think you should be able to easily find this if you look for Green Software Foundation and SCI for AI. And this is trying to set like a basis on having comparable measurements and helping you with the proper guidance on what are or good boundaries are and how you, once you start measuring, then obviously can also improve this later. And I think another resource that I regularly use is the ML.energy leaderboard, and there you can see all different kinds of models and the comparison in the energy per token and the latency, and you kind of get a little bit of an overview of what would be a good model for me to use and have the energy consumption also be one of the criteria for selection of the model.
Okay. So if those tools become visible, we can imagine a world where we're actually looking at the cost versus the benefit and choosing at least the right tool for the right solution. So here we're not talking about necessarily limiting the use of AI, but we're talking about the smart use of AI. So that's a good I just don't know the word that I was trying to say, but that's a good nuance. And Anurag, green coding, that's something that Nagarro has been involved in, sustainability in our coding and our solutions. That's going to, I'm sure, carry over into the work that we're doing with AI as well. Is that something that we're looking at as well in our solutions that we're developing today?
So I'll definitely come to that in a bit, but let me just react to the first bit because I think it's really fundamental. Yeah. So one of the things that I often think about is that, when you say you buy bread for $5, or I think it's not $5, but whatever it is, it doesn't actually incorporate the cost, the environmental cost of making bread. For example, it is the cost of transaction in a transactional economy. So the cost of bread is $5 doesn't mean that it takes $5 to really create that bread. There's huge amounts of money environmentally that goes into calculating that, right? You kind of think about things. Most things are priced low because the harm that they do to the environment, it doesn't show up on the receipt, right? When a factory pollutes a river or a fuel adds carbon to the air, that damage is real. But the people who are paying for it, usually someone else, somebody downstream, maybe future generations, maybe the public, that damage is fairly significant, right? And this thing, this gap, this spillover cost, maybe some things, sometimes we also call it externality, right? But it's basically hidden in a bill at some level. And I think surfacing that bill out is one of the key things that people should be thinking about broadly at some level. Now, for example, the companies which own the data center, they clearly are polluting the environment, whether there is a downstream cost and somebody's paying for it or not, right? Now, for example, there could be a charge to those companies, which is added in addition to whatever else that, for example, like today, for example, there is a carbon tax, which is sort of designed on this idea at some level, right? You could have a cost of, what does it take to create AI at some level. And then you can sort of take that whole thing, in many different directions, right? And so forth. So, but fundamentally, I think the problem is that the environmental cost is not factored into the cost of anything broadly. And this doesn't just apply to AI, it applies to everything that we do in this world. And I think it's really important to surface that and then find ways to think about how to really bring that to the source. Sorry, your question about whether Nagarro at some level, are we measuring the cost of AI? we do all of that in terms of like, okay, how much are we paying for any of these models? How much are we paying for licenses? How much are we paying for usage? And the cost to the company broadly. But again, we suffer from the same problem. We do not have a way to kind of assess all that footprint in a broader context, right? Our goal clearly is, because we are bound by the rules of economics, so that we play and we measure as much as we can to really bring value. Again, to our thought process right now, the goal is to really improve productivity. Our goal is really to improve value creation quickly. So we try and maximize that in as much as possible, and while keeping our economic costs low broadly. But those are and then there could be other metrics that play out here, but broadly that's the principle in action. But yeah, that's what I thought I wanted to add to what you were saying.
But that's really interesting. So go ahead, please.
I just one comment, Anurag, I like it that when you said the bill that we pay for AI, so there is this Green Efficient AI newsletter. Naveen Balani puts this out. It's on LinkedIn also, and like on the day 2, the topic was the invisible bill. And it shows the energy, water, the carbon, the hardware, the money is has all these aspects, and I think it very much seconds what you just said.
Yes.
Sorry, Peter.
I look it up. Yeah.
No, but that's exactly it. So we're not measuring the full life cycle, right? We're not measuring it from chip to manufacturing to data to construction to training to cooling to the disposal. Like we're just measuring an initial cost, but we don't have the holistic picture. But it sounds to me that that's a very complicated picture to put together. Pascal, in your recent interactions, have you seen a desire to start to calculate that more holistic cost?
Yeah, so one of the question, as you mentioned, is where are the boundaries? Right? Where do you set the boundaries? Where do you start counting and including, and can everybody align on those boundaries? Because if one person includes, for instance, the footprint of manufacturing or building the data center, but somebody just starts at the GPU, and when the chips are already built and just worries about the energy consumption, then you're comparing essentially apple and oranges. So there is an alignment problem, and when I say alignment, is really a scope boundary problem, not to be confused with other type of alignment that is a different topic with AI. But here, I think it's important to get level set, and I think I see more and more interest from my client, like companies like Autodesk and Okta, to really include a bit more than carbon emissions and more than just the energy consumption, which is usually what most people think about when they look at the AI energy and environmental footprint, but include also water, include other criteria such as the actual pollution and how the backup of the data center is being powered. So all these need to be also considered, and as well as the impact on community of those data centers, because when you look at the big picture, the numbers of that you look for AI, and then you compare it to other types of industries like the cows and meat consumption, they look very small, right? But they are actually very big for specific communities, and that's where you need to have your due diligence and make sure that you work very closely on this local impact. So.
I think one very crucial local impact is water. Because if we're now talking carbon, if we emit carbon, that kind of affects all of us, right? It kind of goes everywhere. But the water is very local. So if you're in a water scarce area with your data center, or like a, I don't know, water rich area with your data center, and how you're managing the cooling, like how it very much changes how to choose a good data center if you take that into account as well.
I believe there was even in the United States very recently a congressperson who brought an example of water that was near a data center that was no longer drinkable for a whole community. Um, I don't know if Pascal, you know what I'm referring to, but it was
Yeah, and water is a complicated topic, right? Because very often we hear that water is being recycled with these data centers, which is, true to some extent. Most of the water is not pumped every day, but it has a limited still cycle. So it's about 5 cycles, and then it gets rejected, and it has to go through a water treatment facility. And if it doesn't, it's going to pollute, the aquifer. So you have to retreat it before retrieving it, and so it does have a net, negative, usually, impact on the environment.
And I think there
okay.
we even have way more open questions, right? So do you count the consumption or the consumption minus what you put back? Or there's like lots of questions, right? And I think a lot of the normal mechanisms that we can do with carbon, with location shifting, and how we can try to reduce the carbon emissions of the solutions, if we apply the same mechanisms to water, it doesn't really work that way, because it's like if I try to use it there, it increases the energy I need, and so it has a way bigger complexity optimizing for water.
And back to the earlier point, I guess the challenge is that we're all racing towards the future as fast as we possibly can and competing against one another. And unless we have universal rules that everybody plays by, it's been the same problem for sustainability historically, is that countries play by different rules, measure different things, and in the desire to go forward and to win, what are we willing to sacrifice? So that's I guess the big question that's being asked right now, and it brings us to the next topic, which is that sustainable AI is not just about green infrastructure. It's also about better design choices. So I guess this comes back to the models that we can act on, as opposed to the models that we're going to see on a more universal, on a bigger scale, but more on a local scale. The design choices that we make, the smarter models, the right-sized architecture, efficient prompts, better data pipelines, and avoiding AI when simple software works, right? Don't have to use AI for absolutely everything. So then the question is, how do we decide between large foundation models, smaller fine-tuned models, traditional ML, no AI at all? When is it better to use a smaller model, cached responses, rules-based systems, traditional software instead of generative AI at all? Okay, so here we are in the business world. How do we today navigate those choices? Do we have any insights on that? Anurag, let's begin with you.
Sure. So design choices in how we consume AI is the general thought process that you're really exploring here, if I understand the question correctly. And the principle that I would say here that's playing out is that usually the cost of the AI, the economic cost of AI in this case, not the environmental cost, but the economic cost of AI mirrors the efficiency, broadly speaking, at some level. So when you use a smaller language model, of course, your cost is also lower broadly. So when people are making economically smart choices, on an average, because they are priced proportionately, you are on an average being smarter. So it sort of comes down to really understanding AI better at some level, really understanding solutioning better at some level. So, for example, one example I can give is that usually one of the interesting techniques that came out, and there are quite a few techniques, but one of the interesting techniques that became really popular in the AI world was retrieval augmented generation, RAG, as it was called, right? So what happens is typically in a case of a RAG, you do not really need a very big model, but you need the right data to really be available to answer a question. And so what you try and do is, instead of taking all that knowledge and putting it into a large model, what you do is you do with a reasonably okay model, but then you put the data and you sort of give access to the model, to the data, right? And so when you ask a question, the model, instead of trying to use all its parameters it goes instead to the data and gets the answer from the data and brings it back to you. Now, on an average, this is a smart choice. So retrieval augmented generation is generally a good idea as a technique, as a design technique to really solve a problem rather than encoding all that knowledge as parameters into that model, broadly speaking. So there are these kinds of design choices. But then you got to understand that this is really how this is what's really happening, and then a lot of those companies are really making the right choices in the way that they are thinking about this, right? Another interesting way is to what you just said, right? Like this is something called model routing. Like when you're asking a question, it doesn't all have to go to the same model, but you don't know what question you're going to ask. So you must have some smarts in the middle that when you ask a question, that smarts really redirects that question to the right model, as opposed to hoping that every person knows which is the right model to ask a question. So this sort of technique is generally much more preferred when as a, and has been more successful than expecting everybody to just know what the right thing is half the time. Yeah. Then there are things like, a lot of people are building these things called quantization, where you sort of say, okay, I have a model, but I would approximate the amount of bytes that I'm using to store it on an average, and that becomes a more efficient technique. We also use techniques like pruning or distillation, which are all very smart approaches to really building better AI as solutioning approaches. So when we are thinking about that, we often sort of think about that, right? Another interesting thing where we think we have more smarts, economic smarts, but also as a result, energy efficiency smarts is when you use models closer to the data, like more to the edge rather than more to the center, because all that information has to go and come back and so forth, right? So all of this is mirrored in the design thought process around AI. And when we are as AI solution providers thinking about a lot of these, we are clearly using, as in like, I think the world's clearly using a lot of these techniques. And naturally, this is getting reflected into the kinds of environmental choices that are getting made. But the larger problem in my mind is, that not everybody can be so informed on these topics. For example, one interesting control, because on the one hand, AI companies want to give a lot of control to you, and then we are expected to know a lot of what the consequences of these controls mean. So, for example, when you have a model nowadays, like an Opus or a GPT 5.5 or something like in the frontier model, you also get these things called effort. And you have low, medium, high, ultra high, and so forth. Now, what is that is typically, the amount of thought these models have, which is called post-training, things here. So what happens is when you ask a question, the model actually doesn't just run inference, but it sort of generates intermediate thoughts. And then depending on the depth of your question, it'll sort of ask, create a lot of thoughts before it'll answer. So now, again, so far the thing was, okay, I have all these techniques to matter, but now for an average citizen using AI, they must also understand all these little nuances, broadly speaking. So I think the design choices are very, very fundamental, but I think it's always going to be a tension between how much people can know about the best ways to use it and how much control a lot of these companies will provide to us. I think that tension will also play out in the days to come.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I'd like to echo a bit that in terms of the choices that companies have. So some companies are actively building their own AI products, and they want to keep control on how these products are going to shape up. And so they have options to choose open source model. They have options to choose very specific models that are fine-tuned for the task, and these tend to be much more energy efficient. And then you have also the ability to sometimes build an interface on top of your default large language model. And this interface can be custom made that indicates, a signal about what the most, a very clear signal about what the most energy efficient solution is, and even establish quotas. And I've seen that with some of my clients. And this has turned to be quite effective in terms of providing additional information to the employees who are going to be using these models on a daily basis.
Anurag, you mentioned like a lot of the aspects on what you can do, to do that internally. So many of them resonated with me. Those are also the ones that were applying at Siemens, right-sizing the model. For example, we have chat.siemens.com that everybody can use, and this is very widely used. And it just starts with a default model, and then you can choose whatever model you want. But what we learned is that, I don't know, 95% of the people just use whatever model is the default. And so we just made sure that the first model is a small model, and it's good for most of the cases. And the people that know about it know how to change the model or look for it and go about this. So right size the model and then walk the ladder. You also said kind of like the prune or compress, place, cap. Those are some of the mechanisms when you look at how many tokens you spend, and treat tokens as money. And also when you're looking at the retrieval layer, so I think there it's important to filter, rank, right size, refresh, use some of those mechanisms. And I think one thing that really we have to start, and some people are already doing this, we have to treat our prompts like code. So if we version them, if we review them, maybe even test them, we can really make sure that by making the calls, we get the best possible answers. And the answers that we get, then you can again use them to feed or to really shape this. Shape the answer before you ask would be, I think, another one. And I think there sometimes it's also important, depending on what you're working on, to engage with your colleagues. And same with the agentic loop, or you plan it before you run it, and you close it with the right tool. And it's always to the point that less was enough. If you can kind of think of this, how can we make sure that we try to do this at the right level? Because I don't know, if you look at cars, right? Obviously, you could use a Porsche to make pizza deliveries, but is that the right size car or the right type of car for the purpose? And that's the same thing what we need to do then with AI.
Yeah, I like to use the analogy of in the US, it's like using a big pickup truck to buy your bread, right? Your loaf of bread. We tend to default to those very smart frontier models to do very simple tasks that either you could do without AI, or you could use a very, very small model that even runs on your laptop to provide the same results with the same performance.
So there's an irony in what everybody is saying. So I work in marketing, so my job is to extract little sentences out of much smarter things that you all say. Okay, but it just sounds like we need to become more intelligent about how we're using AI, which is kind of ironic. Now, if I talk on your example about using the pickup truck to go buy the loaf of bread, let's just say we haven't successfully made the population more intelligent when it comes to that type of choice. They will use the pickup truck to pick up the bread. Okay, and if they can use the Hummer, they will too. And I would use a Porsche to deliver pizzas because it would probably make me viral on social media, and I could become the Porsche pizza delivery dude influencer, right? So let's not go into the consumer space because that one opens up too big of a can of worms. But if I boil it down to leadership, if becoming more intelligent in how we use AI is going to become a business leadership theme, how is it that we can introduce leadership, or how can leadership introduce the concept of use AI for this? Don't use it for this. Use AI like this. It sounds like we need a lot of education. What are the tools that companies can look at in creating that education?
Pascal?
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's part of the core of the things, and that's how I got started on the topic, is trying to build a curriculum that's aimed at sustainability leaders, but also executives. And it's not just the sustainability team's responsibility, but it should be the broader executive leadership. If you want it to become really a company mindset change, you really have to enforce it from the top down. And very often I see that we have sort of grassroots bottom-up efforts when it comes to using some models more efficiently. But I think it's to be more very effective, especially in large organization, it needs to be driven from the top, and as such, leaders need to become very familiar with the topic and what's at stake, and also separates the myth from the actual data that we have, because there's a lot of information floating out there, and you tend to just grab little I would say bites of information that resonate to you, but that are not, that are sort of confusing everyone. So I think, yeah, that's certainly one of the steps that I'm trying to actively work with, my clients and the teams in general that are taking my course, and encourage them to educate their leaders as well.
Mm-hmm. So for us at Siemens, we currently use the Green Practitioner training from the Green Software Foundation, which is available to do. There's also an SAI for AI training from the Green Software Foundation. And we're also working with Nagarro and other partners, right? How we can really move towards sustainable software, sustainable AI at the core. And so I think there's lots of opportunity. A call like this helps raise awareness for this topic in the community. So thanks for doing that.
I was on mute. I had to speak at one point. Anurag, would you like to add anything?
Yes, absolutely. I think this is an excellent point, and I think what Pascal and Carolin you're talking about. I think this is one of the most important things I personally feel about intelligence and how it shows up. Right? I think leadership is the crucial element here, and I think the way leadership influences decision making in this is through policy, and this and again, citizens uh, show or demonstrate intelligence by choosing leaders who are aware of these topics and are capable of building policies of the type, because at some level fundamentally people follow what everybody else is doing. And if you have a system where if more and more people are rational, then it sort of forces everybody to be rational at large. So as opposed to saying that, oh, I will get some special information which will make me particularly as an individual responsible, I think the way environment regulates behavior is through nobody wants to stand out in their selection. I mean, I've seen us go to different countries and adapt and adjust to the cultural norms of those countries because you want to fit in into those contexts, right? And I see AI as no special situation. I kind of think of it as a behavioral problem where if the organization or countries really start thinking about it practically, and especially their leaders, and they start really thinking of policies first, which would create an environment where people can be smart about how they're choosing AI. I think it'll just be much more easier for us to think about it, right? So I totally believe in individual level awareness, but I also think that somehow we need to work at a policy level more and more actively and bring policy to condition that environment in the right way. And I think if we do both, then we would be really, really much more successful at some level.
Mhm. So I think a lot is already happening or like beginning to happen on the policy level, because I think more
Right.
people have realized that this is required. So we're seeing more and more policymaker, government kind of asking questions or asking for guidance also, like how to do this in the proper way. It's just the beginning of these things, but I think it's getting to that point.
Yes, so I think there are two things about governance. I think that's very important. At the enterprise level, I've seen some very good interaction from some of the sustainability leader I work with, sitting down, having a seat at the table of the governance team, the AI governance team, because very often these AI governance team, they are created to address concerns about privacy, about how your data is being handled, and making sure that there's no data leakage and proper usage, ethical usage of these tools. But I think very often, if you get somebody from the sustainability team who understands also the environmental impact of AI, then you have also an ability to include these into your policies, into your company policies. So all these procurement guidelines as well, how do you interact with your vendors, could be embedded in your policies, and also usage guidelines as well. And then the other thing that we touched on, I think, is about government regulations, and maybe this is like a transition topic, but I think on that point there's still very much a two-speed that I'm seeing globally, with European Union being sort of trying to understand and slow things down and trying to manage this growth of AI through and including the AI, the EU AI Act, for instance, and some other regulations that are trying to mandate companies to these data center operators to disclose more about their data center emissions and energy consumption. And then the other hand, I'm seeing in the US very much more of a different direction right now, with more of a laissez-faire attitude, except when it comes to pricing of the energy to an impact on local population. So quite a bit of discrepancies yet in at the global level in terms of regulations.
And not to mention the whole debate or conversations around sovereign AI beginning to become even more important, saying everybody has to do their own AI, and that is going to amplify this complexity even more. So that's like a thing in there as well.
Now, this is a bit of a tangent, but it's so I like to say that AI it's the Wild West, okay? Because it's all over, right? It's moving really quickly. We're surprised today what it couldn't do yesterday and what can do tomorrow, right? And it's really so it's the Wild West. Companies don't understand how they can lead their transformation with it. Consumers are continuously surprised with what they can do with it even more powerfully. So in the time of the Wild West, it seems like we're running before we're learning to walk. But is there an opportunity, and this is more of an aspirational question, to rethink architecture when we're looking at AI transformation today? And what I mean by that is digital transformation, we took legacy software and we built upon it. We didn't completely displace it. In some cases it was, but for the most part, legacy systems stayed in place and we evolved them, made them better, brought them to the cloud, updated them. With AI transformation, is there an opportunity to rethink architecture and bring even sustainability into the very thinking of it before we completely do our AI transformation? I think it's a tough question.
Yeah, I do think it's a tough question. So I think architecting an AI system or a product that involves intelligence, even like starts before when we have like dev and ops. It's like you even think before that. So you have these architectural quality characteristics that kind of entail everything that we've done prior to in dev and in ops. And we've been trying to have sustainability as one of those non-functional requirements that we have in our normal products. So I think this is the chance to really also include that. You call it resource efficiency or something, it's like so. And then I think we really have a new way of architecting systems and having software that can evolve and be smart itself.
Yeah, and I would add that very often I've seen that architecture decisions about efficiency are driven by scarcity. And so if you have, very scarce resources, scarce memory, scarce GPUs, because they're either unavailable or very expensive, then you start thinking about really how can you minimize, your architecture and your software to fit into that constraint. And I think that we're going to see that more and more, given how things are going right now with the supply chain of hardware and all those dependencies right now that we're seeing worldwide and the geopolitical tension. And that will drive by itself efficiency naturally, which will hopefully conduct to better, lower carbon footprint of those models. But it's not the only solution, because obviously there is the Jevons paradox, and more people using AI. So just having a model more efficient doesn't make the overall environmental footprint lower. It sometimes eventually makes it even bigger. And so we need to think about just efficiency as one of the components that's going to help out with this overall environmental footprint.
And I always think we have to have the big picture, right? And there's lots of aspects that we can optimize, right? I also saw there was a question in the chat, right? How we can, obviously, if you have decentral models with DeepSeek or examples that are then came about because they had limited access to GPUs, or if the right way would be to kind of limit a budget for compute, energy, water impact or something. So I think we definitely have to keep the planetary boundaries in our mind, because that's like all of us were in the same boat here. Yeah. So this is what we really need to keep in mind. And then every aspect that we can do that makes the whole thing better, I think that's something worth looking at. And a lot of times, lots of little things really matter, because I don't know, in Germany, we separate our garbage, and I put like water and glass, and I don't know how much is the impact if just I do it, right? So it's probably very small, but since we're all doing it, the impact is really big. And it's the same with software, and it's the same with AI.
So in many ways, we're back to the initial point that we were making, though, with the lack of transparency. The individual doesn't have the carrot to know what impact they're having on the greater good. The enterprise also isn't able to see where their impact is, and the lack of impact. Humans are motivated by immediacy, right? We like what's immediately available and what's good for us right now. The idea of longevity and the idea that it's good for the long run isn't a motivator. So how do we bring that transparency is an important question that I think today was brought up several times. And at a company level, if we bring it down to just one simple question, who even owns sustainability within a company? This question of AI sustainability, who owns it? Is it a CIO, a CTO, a chief sustainability officer? How do we make it a part of the central organization? Do any of you have any thoughts?
We have a central sustainability organization, and obviously they're responsible for reporting. They're responsible for creating transparency. They're responsible for also creating internal policies for all of us. We have a degree framework that kind of helps us, that guides everything in that direction. It also helps us keep track, and we have the ambitions that are underneath it. The good thing is we also have a sustainability department, for example, within IT, right? So IT SUS, or then within our digital industries and smart infrastructure, they all collaborate together because it's a very big topic to handle that.
Yeah, and I would add
If I
that
can,
sometimes. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Anurag.
go on, Pascal, please finish.
No, go ahead.
I was reacting to the architecture question a bit. It got so I thought I'd just quickly because I think it's interesting. Can I segue back into that? Will it be okay, Peter? So one of the ways we should be thinking about sustainable. I mean, one is clearly when we think of sustainability is energy, cost, compute, carbon, and so forth. That's clearly one of the ways to think about it, right? The other way to think about sustainability is like the more literal way, like when you buy something, how long does it keep giving you value? And if something can keep giving you value over a long, long time, clearly it's a much more sustainable than if it was relatively smaller window of time, right? Like, so when you said longevity, Peter, it kind of like was the cue in my mind, like I was thinking about it and I sort of like felt that one of the ways we should be thinking about architecture, when we are thinking about architecture, is to sort of think about how are we thinking whether this system that we are putting in place can stay healthy and continue to produce value, and value above the cost of just running it, because at some point it might get inefficient and then it'll be a problem and you want to replace it, right? So if you can architect systems in that manner, then you could be really, really sort of like you are thinking intelligence sensibly. Intelligence is expensive, and so when you are using intelligence, you are being very judicious with it broadly, right? So for example, one principle, architectural principle that you should, when we are designing some of these systems which use intelligence, is like, you don't let all your components of your system call this intelligence from wherever. You want to create a place where you have a very simple, singular place where this intelligence is called for. So tomorrow, if you have to replace that, it's a very simple way for you to just replace that model with some other model, for example, right? As opposed to having intelligence be distributed throughout your system, which is just a much poorer architecture, in my mind, right? So I'm kind of thinking that the way when we are designing with intelligence, clearly there is a thought process of how you want to architect with intelligence, and the important things would be something of that nature, right? Like try and design systems that don't get outdated with every model that come in, broadly speaking, right? If you could do that, then I think you have done a good job architecting at some level. Yeah, so things like that really matter, right? Another interesting thing with intelligence is that one of the interesting things with intelligence is about uncertainty, and you measure confidence in your abilities when you're building these systems, right? So if you have a way to measure how confident is your system when it's making some of these answers, then that's a very interesting way to think about longevity of a system without having to change everything, right? So just coming back to the question of architecture with intelligence, when you're architecting with I think there should be a few key principles we should be thinking about to keep the system going as things change around intelligence.
Mhm.
I just thought that would
Yeah, and so I very much think that we need lots of different aspects, right? For one, we need to architect for AI because that's kind of like at the very beginning where it starts. We need to have the awareness all throughout our organization. So this is where we need the training or maybe set the framework at Siemens. So I think that's a really good thing. And we also have to see maybe how we can integrate this in our normal processes, right? So just like security has made it. They're a first-class citizen, and they're on every step of the software development lifecycle. You are aware of what happens with security, and sustainability also needs to get into that league. And if we have the transparency, it totally changes your behavior. So I have solar on my roof now, and now I see exactly when I need to do my dishes or do my laundry, right? Before I would just do this whenever I came home in the evening. It just changes your behavior, even only seeing the values. And the next thing is important that everything that we use that I have available is already as green, as clean as possible, right? So this would be my purchasing department, my IT department. So everything that I have here, my laptop, the software that I'm using to build new software, all of this needs to kind of have it built in. Same with reusable infrastructure or resources, building blocks that we have internally, right? We have also a department when set up the cloud account already has like first building blocks. All of this already needs to have sustainability built in so that I don't have to worry about it. I just use it and I know it's already set as the best that it can be. And then when I look at adding AI to this, then I really have to look to have the sustainable model training start with pre-trained models, sustainable model deployment and inference. You already mentioned AI on edge close to the data, and really how I manage my data so that I also think of how many duplicates, how much do I need to send the data? Can I work with disaggregated data? All of these aspects as well. So I think this is really, all of this is required to establish this within an organization. And that's it's not going to happen quickly or overnight. It's a big effort.
There's actually a couple of really interesting questions happening on the. So what I love about working at Nagarro is how often I'm reminded that I'm very far away from being the smartest person in the room. Okay, that of course in this panel is obvious, but then I look at the questions and it's much more obvious as well, right? So I'm going to try to read some of these questions. I think this one fits naturally into what we were just discussing. Please feel free to react to it. So Varun has asked, when we discuss the cost of intelligence, we usually talk about GPUs, data centers, power, and cooling. But isn't there another efficiency question? Who can produce the right outcome with minimum token, compute, and human review waste? Should companies invest as seriously in human transformation, AI judgment, domain-specific workflows, model efficiency discipline? Are they investing as they are investing in AI infrastructure? That's I think it recaps a lot of the themes that we're talking about right now. It's a great question if anyone wants to try to tackle it.
Yeah, so I can try to tackle that. So I think it's, in the broader question is how much control are we willing to keep, with this AI technology, and how much are we willing to release? So we've seen very much with, vibe coding, for instance, the fact that fewer and fewer developers are actually reviewing the code that their, AI is generating. And so it comes back to, the question that was asked is, similarly, where is the place, what is the place of human in there? Is it, are we using this technology really to assist human or to, replace some of the tasks that human do? And as such, we have lesser and lesser role to play as people who are traditionally work in offices and have sort of these white collar jobs. And I think it's almost like an ethical
Oh, I'm losing the voice.
I think Pascal, we've lost your voice.
Yeah, so
No, you're back. It's okay.
I'm back. Okay, sorry about that. I don't know.
Yeah, so I do think that the role will be different. Our task will be different. I don't think we're completely losing against AI. So it's really important, even then if you can generate the things, you still have to know how to ask the right questions. You still have to know how to validate the results. So I think we need to learn new skills, and we need to develop our people to gain these new skills so that we can then efficiently use AI and get the best results. So I very much agree with this question that we should do both again. Work on the AI, but also improve the humans, help them gain these new capabilities.
Actually, as a matter of fact, in addition to token cost, the biggest cost we incur is the human transformation cost that is going in getting everybody to start using this sensibly. Of course, it's the metrics are not like unit level efficiency of tokens, but more around value creation and people understanding the subject matter and then being able to contribute, as opposed to who's the most efficient when it comes to producing an output with a certain amount of input. That becomes a little too mechanical. But clearly, the whole question around human upskilling, human judgment, awareness, responsibility, these are the topics to where we think a lot of investments will have to go in if we want to benefit the value of AI in the larger run. So absolutely.
And we really need to learn how to shape it, right? It's when you look at the number of tokens spent, it doesn't mean anything. It's like it used to be number of lines of code, or I don't know how many story points or how many pull requests. So it's those are things. I mean, they give you some indication, but they don't talk about the quality. Yeah.
And adding, we're talking about metrics here and, productivity metrics, and adding along those productivity metrics, some environmental metrics, I think is important to make sure that we have complete picture, right, of what's happening, and not just the one side, one part of the picture, which is employee productivity, and have really all these available as you're starting to measure the efficiency of those systems.
Absolutely. And we have a sustainability problem here in this place I am. The electricity has gone off. So I think this is very appropriate before the generator comes up.
The timing was rather ironic. So here's another question. It's about AI hardware, because we've talked a lot about the software. So if AI hardware becomes obsolete every 2 or 3 years, we are just facing a financial risk. We're facing an environmental crisis. How are infrastructure leaders accounting for the massive surge in e-waste and embodied carbon from constantly manufacturing new chips? How do we scale suitability when the hardware itself has such a short shelf life? I don't know if any of us can talk about hardware, but it's an interesting question.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, there are two things. First, the fact that right now, e-waste recycling in general is not very efficient. And one of the reasons is that products are not designed to be recycled in the first place. And this is, something that's very often overlooked compared to the manufacturing footprint, for instance. But it's definitely becoming a greater problem as we are starting to see those cycles accelerating, right? It used to be 5 years for a server to be recycled. I'm talking about data center servers. And now, with the new chips coming on for the training, we're seeing more like a 2-year or even 12 to 18 months cycles. I was just talking to somebody who was very familiar with the topic yesterday, and that's the type of cycles we're seeing. And so right now, there are solutions of downcycling. So everybody's trying to figure out how to downcycle those chips to maybe some lesser intensive. So you move from training maybe to inference. But even that, is not simple, and it's not good enough, because eventually those chips end up in landfill. So I think it's really a global problem, and we've seen that with other, with other type of industries in the past, about where those chips also where this e-waste gets recycled, and I think that's also something where regulation plays an important role. That's
Yeah, I'm also not a hardware person. I'm a software person. But if I just think of my phone, so I know when there's new apps for the phone, they actually look at like how much resources they require from the OS, from the phone, because obviously you probably all have one app on there. If you use it for a long time, then you have to go charge your phone, and it's annoying. And it also, I think, from a software development point of view, we can design the solutions so that they don't use that many resources, so that they can run longer on a certain type of hardware. And so I think it's like we can also do our portion. Yes, the hardware will evolve, but how can we write the software that it can run longer on a certain type of hardware?
The hardware problem is going to be a very big problem. The e-waste problem with AI, it's just going to get hyped up to a level which is going to be, I think, one of the biggest problems we'll face. In the olden days, which is whatever the olden days look like now, these data centers used to run their GPU, CPU, mostly their CPU setups for 5 to 7 years before anybody replaced it, because the speed of the change that was using that hardware wasn't that high, right? But now with AI, the training clusters that they have to build out have to get replaced every 12 to 18 months. It's not like that the hardware is broken, it still powers on and the GPU can still work, but it just cannot keep up with the next wave of models that you have to train in a very efficient way. And so now you have a flood, right? You have so much, so many data centers being used to build these AI models, that in the days to come, this is going to be a massive situation. I mean, this already is being factored a lot in the economics of what we do broadly, but broadly, this problem is going to be super significant for us to figure out. But I have no idea how is that going to be addressed.
Okay. So if I bring it back to software, I'm going to ask one last question, and then we can do some quick surefire answers just to finish this on a fun note, because we're almost at the end of the time. So I found this question to be interesting. I apologize to anybody who did ask a question. I didn't get to it, but obviously we have limited time. So with cloud tools such as Microsoft Sustainability Manager, Azure Emissions Insight, Azure Carbon Optimization, it helped organizations understand their environmental impact before taking action on cloud workloads. So for example, in one environment with thousands of cloud servers, we identified development systems and automatically shut them down on weekends, reducing both cost and energy consumption. So as AI adoption grows, are there similar tools and metrics available to measure the environmental impact of AI workloads? Maybe in the future, such tools and metrics will help.
And I don't know if you've seen this, but I also saw this question and I posted a link to it because the Green Software Foundation has a list. It's called Awesome Green Software, and it just has a list of all types of software. You just have to keep scrolling when you go to that link. And then it has links for AI carbon, for AI energy, for cloud-based different tools that you could use. And if you know another tool, then please submit it to this list.
What I found is that right now, a lot of the tools available, they give you sort of a rough idea of, typical AI usage, generating an image, generating a video, but they don't give you exactly what your company is using. And so if you want to know what your company is using, and if you're developing AI system, your cloud reports are going to be your go-to tools in combination sometimes with traditional carbon accounting platforms. And there is currently certainly a lot of still manual work to be done to extract the information that's only due to AI. So people use tagging, but there's certainly a gap right now that we're still seeing in extracting this information out of the box.
I think, and in the question, there was also the that there are tools available in the dashboard and stuff. So with many of these dashboards, you see the total cost, and this is your cloud infrastructure and the AI cost, right? It's not separated. So I think that would be really help if you could kind of see them separate and you see what's your AI cost and your cloud cost.
Perfect. Okay, so before Anurag's phone runs out of battery or computer runs out of battery, right now he's running. Let's finish with some surefire questions. Just maybe each one of you can answer one question, which is 5 years from now. What's the one thing in this whole discussion that you would like to see the most progress in?
I can go first. I hope that we get to AGI and ASI and it solves the energy problem in the next 5 years, and we are all sorted from there on.
I'm hoping for awareness and transparency, and out of that, everything else will come.
So for me, I would second Carolin, but I hope that will happen in the next 6 months, not 5 years. And in the next 5 years, I hope that all the data centers can be powered with complete renewable energy and have zero impact on the environment.
All aspirational and great. So now we have to set a session from 5 years from now to see where we succeeded or not. So I'll ask the team to set the date and we can meet again. Thank you very much, everyone, for the time that you've given. Thank you to our listeners for having joined us for this session. I found it truly passionate. It's a really interesting subject matter, and one that's for sure going to grow more and more and become of more importance as we move forward with AI and, of course, the need for it to be sustainable.